Hello, and welcome to the Project Good podcast. I'm your host, Annmarie Hylton. Project Good is a social impact podcast interviewing experts and advocates about the pressing problems that we face globally and hearing how they suggest we move forward in the future. The Project Good podcast is brought to you by Project Good Work. The goal of this podcast is to inspire people and organizations to develop a mindset that can move others to positive action regarding the complex issues facing people and the planet. For March, we're focused on human rights and women in Iran. Iranian society is a complex blend of deeply rooted Persian traditions and strict Islamic regulations, currently experiencing significant, rapid changes driven by a young, educated population. While the government enforces conservative religious and political norms, a vibrant, modern, and increasingly secular society exists, marked by strong social networks, high education levels, and strong independent cultural expression. Protests in Iran have been going on for many years. The catalyst for many of the recent movements has been rooted in systematic issues related to political repression, gender inequality, economic hardship, and calls for social freedoms. However, several significant moments since 2024 have made or reignited and intensified protests. One of the most highlighted was the tragic death of Mahsa Amini in September 2022 after her arrest by the Iranians' political morality police for allegedly violating the country's strict dress code, which sparked massive protests across the country. The Women, Life, Freedom movement that followed in 2022 and 2023 focused on challenging gender-based oppression and the regime's control over women's rights. This movement continued to inspire many in 2024 and beyond, especially among youth and young women who demand freedom and how they live and express themselves. Today, I have the honor to speak with Zolal Habibi, who's an Iranian human rights activist and a prominent voice for justice, democracy, and women's rights in Iran. Let's get into the interview. Zolal Habibi serves as the Foreign Affairs Committee of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, where she advocates globally for a free, secular, and democratic Iran. With over 2 decades of dedicated activism, she has been a fierce advocate on behalf of the voiceless inside Iran, regularly appearing on international platforms and forums, human rights conferences, and live broadcasts across major media platforms. Her activism began in her teens, profoundly shaped by the loss of her father, a respected Iranian writer and political dissident who was killed by the regime during the 1988 massacre. This personal tragedy ignited a lifelong commitment to ensuring that no other family suffers such loss and that the voices of Iran's political prisoners, dissidents, freedom seekers are heard on the world stage. Her work has directly contributed to securing international recognition for the 1988 massacre as a crime against humanity and the safe relocation of 3,000 at-risk dissidents in Iraq, demonstrating her ability to translate advocacy into tangible, life-saving outcomes. Welcome, Zolal Habibi.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you, Annmarie, and please allow me to greet all those who are tuning in to the podcast today.
Yes, thank you, Zol. I am right now, obviously, when we were planning to do this interview, we did not know what was going to take place almost what I would say overnight. So a lot has, obviously taken place now in Iran with the U.S. But before we go deep and start dissecting where we stand now, I always like to get a little bit of a personal understanding of the person I'm interviewing and their heart and how they think. So where do you find your daily strength to keep going to do the work of fighting for freedom?
Well, I think that it's one of those cases where the goal itself is very inspiring. To be able to, be able to create that true democracy in Iran, to be able to create that true, system where there will be, a people's sovereignty, and to be able to return people the basic freedom that Iranians have been denied for decades, if not centuries. To be able to return that to them, I think that in itself is like the greatest inspiration, and that is what keeps me going, because knowing that, you know, you can make such a great impact that will, it's not only going to impact your own life or your own direction in life, but it can make that much of an impact on humanity, on society, and history. So I think for me, that is like the greatest inspiration, and I think that would be like the greatest achievement I could ever dream for. To be able to truly, be able to create a democracy in Iran and be able to give people back their freedoms that they've been denied.
Wow. And you have experienced, I guess from even like a personal loss of your father, but then, I guess having the experience as you have lived, in the U.S. and then, seeing the atrocities of things that happen, just not only to women, but just to all the people in that nation, has probably, I'm sure, has shaped you into be a lot different, I think, from probably when you first started. I guess, would you say what have you seen, I guess, from you personally from when you first started getting into this activism till now? What has been, I guess, your biggest change that you've seen within yourself?
Well, I think there has been a lot of change, especially since, I have been a member of this resistance since the age of 18. So that is it's been quite a journey. But I think that the thing that has changed the most is probably like my perspective on issues, on life, on, what is, I guess, what is the reasoning behind us being on this earth, or like what is our mission in life, or what are we doing, or what direction are we going into? But also, understanding how complex things are, because they may seem, a lot simpler when you just look at it from afar. But once you're in it, you realize that it's so complex and there's so many different things at play. But I think one of the lessons that I have learned has been that, this struggle is also a form of science. So it has rules and guidelines. It has things that, you can't change the formula. You can't all of a sudden 2 + 2 is not going to become 5. And there are certain things that you have to, stick by and stand by and continue to, work on. And I think that is something that has been important and then has really allowed me to, you know, um, follow in a specific path and to be able to move forward based on principles and values instead of what might be, popular one day and not but the next. So I think that having that direction has really helped, and it has helped me, ground myself and be able to understand, what responsibility it is that we have, and what our role is, and that has been immensely helpful.
Yes, I like that you bring up the complexity, because from an outside view, and I'm going to take it from the outside U.S. view, just because now the U.S. Has went in and started bombing Iran, and and now we have even more fights and warfare in the region that didn't need more fights and warfare. And so, speaking from the outsider's perspective, um, and not understanding, well, I guess even for me, I guess it has hurt my heart, because a lot of times people don't remember people. And going out there and starting more fighting, obviously it always hurts innocent people that had either nothing to do with it, or just were going on along on their lives, and now here they are in an additional mess that they don't need to be in. And so speaking of that, I guess now that we are in an unpredicted time, I guess, a conflict. Um, how do you, for people in the U.S., I guess, how should they, I guess, be looking at it, or how can you give them a perspective that they are probably not going to get because we are, far removed from it from a physical distance, but also from a knowledge distance. I guess how can we get people to understand things? And I guess if I were going to put it together, like a human connection to a human connection, not just, of course, that people are in a war zone, but understanding, I guess, the deeper aspects of the Iranian people and what are they really fighting for? Because I think that gets missed. Like, what are they really fighting for? There's freedom, but there's probably something deeper.
Well, the reality is that I think people of Iran have been fighting for freedom. I mean, if you look at our history for like 120 years now. Um, so this quest for freedom has been continuous. Um, but right now we have reached a point that the Iranian people, especially the younger generation, as you mentioned in the intro, they have really decided to take their destiny into their own hands. And I think that they have also seen, how in the last few decades the fight has continued, and they see it, that they understand that, we have to pay a price for this freedom. It's not going to be handed to us in a silver platter. But the Iranian people are willing to pay that price, and that is what you see in, the last decade. We've had 4 major uprisings in Iran. The people of Iran do understand what it means to defy this regime and to stand up against it. They understand that it comes with a very high price. It means people's lives. But they're still willing to take that risk, and they still come to the street. And I think that is really important to understand. So the Iranian people, before anything, are the ones who are calling for the overthrow of this regime in its entirety, because they understand that until that day, there's no way that we're going to be able to see even a glimpse of freedom in Iran. So this continuous fight has been led by the resistance. I think what is really important in comparison, I guess, maybe to some other countries, or even in our own history. But what's important is that in the last 47 years, there hasn't been a single day that the regime has not been faced with resistance from the people of Iran. So the people of Iran have never given in to the status quo. They have had a organized resistance movement that has been fighting this regime for 45 years right now, and even since before that against the Shah too. So I think that is really important. Now, the people of Iran have never given in to dictatorship, and they've always stood, tall against it. And the world saw from December 28th, when the uprisings broke out in Iran, and the beginning of January, the Iranian regime responded to the protests with brutal force. Thousands upon thousands were killed in the street. Over 50,000 people were detained and are still in a state of limbo, with many of them fresh not being clear like what had happened to them or what their fate has been. So, but the people of Iran, despite understanding those risks, they came to the street. Where does that come from? You have to have hope to be willing to take such a risk. And I think that the people of Iran have that hope that we can create that change and we can bring about that, regime change. And that is why you see, this much self-sacrifice. You see this dedication. You see, the resistance units throughout Iran who are continuing this fight and keeping the flame of resistance alive against this regime. So I think it's, it's really very important to understand the whole situation, because and the history behind it, because 120,000 people had just been executed for their political views since the beginning of this regime, so in the last 47 years. And it's still continuing. Just in 2025, 2,200 people were executed in Iran. And we saw the uprisings. Everyone, I think, saw the videos and the images of the black body bag, on the streets of Iran. But despite all of that, the people of Iran continue to stand, and they believe that they can bring about change themselves. I think that is something that's really important. This is a narrative that maybe many have not heard, especially like in the US and also in the Western world in general. But the people of Iran, we believe that the solution to Iran is neither war nor appeasement. It's to support the Iranian people to bring about change and to be able to overthrow this regime in its entirety. And the reason behind it is because we understand how complex the situation of Iran is, and Iran's geography and the role it played in the geopolitics of the region. And we also have an understanding of the regime. So, the reality is that democracy can't be installed in any country. It has to come from the people of Iran. So that's why the Iranian people want to take their destiny into their own hands, especially because we have this experience from the past. If you look at the last 100 years in Iran, Reza Khan, he was brought in by the British through a military coup. And like he wasn't serving those purposes anymore, they had him sent into exile and brought his son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who was known as the Shah, in power. At the beginning, he didn't have that much power, and that's why, because the people of Iran had a constitutional revolution and wanted to have a constitutional monarchy, he had to give in to some of that. And so we had one democratic government allowing Dr. Mossadegh, who was the prime minister of Iran, and he nationalized Iran's oil. That was not to the benefits of Western powers. And so, unfortunately, there was a coup d'etat against Dr. Mossadegh carried out by the CIA and MI6, and the only democratic government that we ever had was taken out. And Bashar was reinstated. And from the day after, he ruled with an iron grip, because he has learned his lessons too, and he needs to, if he wants to keep power, he needs to be it's by force. And because the people of Iran did not want a puppet government in place. And unfortunately, we saw, the Savak and the brutalities of the Savak, and we saw, he turned Iran into a one-party state, saying that there's only one party, and that's Rastakhi's. If you don't like it, leave the country or go to prison. And we saw the brutalities, the killings, and also, the economic situation in Iran at that time. There was a major, difference between the classes, and there were a lot of people who were living in poverty. So the Iranian people eventually were able to overthrow the Shah through a popular uprising in 1979. But unfortunately, their revolution was hijacked by Khomeini. And why? Because at the time, it was a Cold War era. The Shah had actually imprisoned or killed most of those actual revolutionaries who had created this revolution. And at that time, 6 months before, the overthrow of the Shah, Khomeini was brought from Najaf in Iraq to Paris. And there were negotiations held in Guadeloupe. And, Western powers decided that, hey, maybe at the end of the day, it's better for us to have, someone like Khomeini, who is a religious figure in power in Iran, rather than have some of these, progressive movements come into power, because they were worried about where they would stand in regards to USSR and the Cold War and whatnot. And so since then, it's been 47 years and the people of Iran have been paying that price. The reality is that the people of Iran revolted for a reason, and they overthrew the Shah because they wanted to end it to the monarchy in Iran, and end to that dictatorship. But unfortunately, it was replaced by a dictatorship far worse, and that was, a religious tyranny. And right now, we have reached the point that the people of Iran, they have, decided that we need to put this regime to its end. We can't continue to have, uprisings every few years, then it's met with brutal force, and then everyone goes back into their home out of fear, and then the next time the same cycle repeats itself. They have decided to take their fate in their own hands. And the thing is that we have seen how these uprisings in Iran have evolved over the past, decade. Each time you could see that in society, you could see it in their messaging, you could see it in the way that they are carrying out the uprisings. Like, one of the things that everyone noticed in this uprising in January was the role of the resistance units. Resistance units are the network that is belongs to the IBK, which is like the main opposition group in Iran, and they have groups or units on the ground who organize underground. They're local to in that area, and are able to organize with one another to carry out activities against the regime. Just in 2024, they carried out 39,000 activities and targeted over 3,000 centers of oppression. And actually, just 5 days before the start of the war, they carried out a operation with over 250 members of this resistance unit against the headquarters of Khamenei, which was unprecedented in over 2 decades. So they were really, you could see that direction that they were going in, and they are the ones who have been able to keep that hope alive in people. And everyone said this time around in the uprising, you could see hope in people's eyes, and you could also see that they were on the offensive. They were disarming the suppressive forces. They were fighting back. They were protecting one another and supporting one another. And I think that is the effect that these resistance units have had on society in Iran. Right now, at this point that we are, the National Council of Resistance of Iran has announced the provisional government for the overthrow of the regime and for the transfer of sovereignty to the people of Iran, based on the 10-point plan presented by Mr. Rajavi. I think that that's really key to understand, because this provisional government is nothing new. It's been announced since 1981, actually, by the National Council of Resistance of Iran. But what's important to note is that Western governments need to understand, or the world needs to understand, there won't be, because these scenarios are fed, that, there's going to be a power vacuum after the fall of the regime, or this will happen, or there will be civil war, there will be this or that. We want to clarify that that's not the case. The people of Iran have that ability to bring about that change, and they have an organized resistance movement. They have a parliament in exile with nearly 500 members, 52% of which are women, and with a full 6-month interim government plan. And then after that, they plan on having, after 6 months, elections for a assembly, which will be putting together, drafting the new constitution. And then that constitution will be put to vote by the people. And based on that, that new republic is going to be formed and new elections are going to be held. So this roadmap is very clear. And the 10-point plan presented by Mr. Bajrai is also very clear. It has been endorsed by over 4,000 lawmakers around the world, over 130 former heads of state, or about 100, Nobel laureates. And so this is something that is widely known. It has been out there for 20 years. And I think what's important is that it has withstood the test of time. So when this movement says, for instance, we believe in gender equality, you see the fact that not only do they believe in gender equality, but the president-elect of this movement is a woman. 52% of the parliament-elect are women. The entire leadership council of the NEK are women, and all the secretary generals of this movement have been women since 1989. So, those just speak for themselves. When they say we believe in the abolition of the death penalty, that means a great deal, especially because they have been the main victims of the torture and executions of this regime. So they know what they're talking about, and they just want to see this cycle of killing and executions and torture to be stopped. So that's why they called for the abolition of the death penalty and all forms of torture. Or like, for instance, they call for recognizing the rights of the different ethnicities in Iran and like the autonomy of the Kurdistan or, the region. And they call for separation of religion and state. So everything that they stand for in this 10-point plan, it really served as like a guideline for how to move forward, even though they have like full plans too and 25 committees that are part of the National Council of Resistance everyone. So the reality is that we have a clear image of what the day after would look like. But what's important is to bring that day about, and that has to be done by the people of Iran at the end of the day.
Wow, and you answered exactly the question I was going to ask, is like what happens after the fall. But it seems obviously you guys have been working diligently in the background and setting up everything so everything is in place, which is different than when other regimes fall around the world, and then the country is left in a vulnerable state, and then likely then another dictator arises, or there's total civil unrest, and and people flee the country. But in this case, I was in my mind, I was having a mix of thoughts of like 1960s civil rights in America, and I even went to The Force Be With You, and thinking of Star Wars. So you got to me, it's a mix of kind of both worlds that you have thought about the future being like the Star Wars, so like what happens, but then also from a civil rights perspective you have been building this community and this connection between each other throughout the country, so that when things do change, you are ready to go. Because I believe always, as we've seen time and time again, that's the hardest part, that people, they fight for change, and then when change finally comes, then everyone, and rightly so, is like tired because of the fight, but then not prepared for how to move forward, and so then chaos ensues. But in this case, it seems that you have all prepared for everything. And so I guess, would you say that people right now, it was of course a kind of a ticking a ticking clock that in the region, would you say that people are I guess hopeful with this new like US going in, or they're more concerned? I guess, where do the people stand with what is happening now?
Well, the reality is that right now, since the first day of the war, and there has been no internet connection in Iran, so it's very difficult to be able to have a complete feel of exactly what the people of Iran are feeling. But from the footages that we are receiving, or the messages that we are able to receive, they are scattered, but we are receiving them. I think that right now, it's a state of war. So I don't think anyone wants to see their people bombed. And the reality is that a war does not only affect, those who are in power, it affects the people, and it affects the infrastructure, and affects, civilians and everything. So right now, unfortunately, And it's not even limited to Iran right now, because unfortunately, the Iranian regime is the number one state sponsor of international terrorism. So what they are doing is, in fact, they have spread this war to cover practically most of the Middle East. We see the Iranian regime, attacking different countries in the region right now, going as far as Cyprus in their attacks, which is on European soil. So the reality is that we have an understanding of the Iranian regime. The Iranian regime from day one, it had been clear that they always had this mentality that if we're going to go down, we're not going to go alone. We're going to take everything down with us. And that is, the situation. Unfortunately, they could care less about human casualties, because, a regime that executes its own people, massacres its own people on the streets, they're not going to show mercy to others. That is the unfortunate reality when it comes to the Iranian regime and how they, I guess, think, or their mentality in general. But that being said, I think that right now we are in a very critical juncture. The people of Iran, they see the solution, as I said, as the Iranian resistance has said, not just today. It's not just in regards to this specific scenario that we're in right now, but in general, we have said this for over 20 years that, the solution to Iran is neither war nor appeasement. Appeasement leads to a war, and that is not only our experience, but if you look at World War II, what led to, Hitler having so much power and, being able to move forward so much, was because of the policy of appeasement. Everyone turned a blind eye until it was too late, and unfortunately we had the World War. That is the same scenario with the Iranian regime. The Iranian regime has unfortunately used the policy of appeasement, which have been, in the policy from all Western governments practically in the last 4 decades, to its benefits, to buy time for itself, but also to use it to suppress any form of dissent inside of the country, and to legitimize its rule, its brutalities, and its killing. And to, unfortunately, the main people who have been used, or the main issue that has been used as a bargaining chip at the negotiation table with the Iranian regime throughout all of these years, has been the Iranian resistance. And so we have paid a grave price due to that. And sometimes I imagine, like, if this policy of appeasement was not in place, right now the situation of Iran and the world would be very different. But unfortunately, that has been the consequences of the policy of appeasement. By now, we've reached a point that the world feels like there's no way that they could continue to negotiate with this regime, or to bring about some kind of change with this regime. And so now we see a full-fledged, practically, war that has, today is day 14 as we're recording. And unfortunately, the people of Iran are paying the price for this war too. So the people of Iran believe that they have the capability and capacity to bring about change, because we have a organized resistance movement. We have an independent movement that's not looking, it doesn't have its eye on other countries or what you're going to do for us. They have their eyes on their own people and their own assets, and we believe that the people of Iran are capable of bringing about that change. So I think that is, like, the key issue. And I think the second is that also, because a lot of people say, what comes next, or what's going to happen? Well, the people of Iran have this message. They say, look, we want to move forward to a secular democratic republic, which means no to Shah, no to Mullah, which means we don't have to choose between the current status quo and the previous dictatorship. We want to move away from this, hereditary system, and move forward to having a true democracy in Iran. And, for the people of Iran, I don't know, you probably know a lot of Iranians. We are a pretty proud nation when it comes
Yes.
to our history, our culture, everything. But the reality is that, unfortunately, Iran, which was the first country which, the human rights charter comes from Iran, but right now, Iran has the worst state of human rights in the world, and it's the number one country in executions and torture. So and that is unfortunately the current reality of Iran. But our people have the the ability to be so much more. Iran had the greatest brain drain in the world. Just imagine if all of these Iranians could actually serve their own people, be it the ones who are currently in Iran and they're denied, uh, you know, the opportunity that they should be having to be able to move forward. And just imagine also all of those who are abroad who would love to have the possibility to one day be able to go and serve their own people. So I think the future of Iran is very bright in that regards. I think the people of Iran have learned, with a great price, but they've learned their lessons from the previous dictatorships, and how this regime has been able to rule over these years. And so they want to move forward from that. And they want to be able to create, a secular democratic republic. That is the unifying message among all. Because there might be, of course, like any society, people have differences, people have different views. And that's fine. But what's important is what is that unifying message among them? And I think that unifying message today is, as I said, a secular democratic republic. And that is key for the people of Iran.
Yes, now when I was thinking about, what you were saying, and then also just thinking about that you have a very large youth population, Iran, and it is interesting, but I think that just on the planet in general, that we are in a critical time of change, that the youth, because of their exposure to not only, I guess you would say, maybe technology, but then also they have a whole different view and worldview than previous generations because of this connectivity and a sense of that. I guess, to lack of better ways to say it, that it doesn't have to be this hard out here. That previous generations are making things so much more complicated than they need to be, and it's interesting. What I had in my mind is that the youth are bringing Iran back to its core roots. And what I mean by that is, I know a Persian history that is very rich with, not only poetry, but mathematics and, knowledge, and that the people are very, smart and intelligent. And not only that, but tend to be within themselves, wanting to be a diplomatic type of people between each other, and so it's interesting, but also I guess wonderful that essentially the young people want to bring Iran back to its heart, essentially.
Yeah, I think that right now, as you said, I think technology has been very helpful. I mean, the fact that people are more informed than ever. So that's where they know what they don't want, but they also know what they. And I think that really puts things into perspective and allows people to have an understanding of where we're going, what to watch out for. What are the threats that we're faced with right now, because at the end of the day, it's very easy to say, like, yeah, the people of Iran are fighting for freedom and hopefully that'll go over well. And, you know, uh, but it's very important to understand that because Iran is a country that is rich in natural resources, it is a country that um, has a lot of benefits and a lot of ways for anyone who is, ruling it, I guess. There are a lot of foreign interests that come into play. And it's really important to be able to understand that and to be able to put those into perspective and be able to understand, like, why is it that it's important to have like an independent movement? Why is it important for it not to be linked to another government. Why is it important to, have that sovereignty, the people's sovereignty? And because we have had, a grave experience from the past. And so I think that these are things that are very important. Right now, like for instance, there are those who try to promote, the return of the monarchy or the Shah to Iran. Well, the reality is that they don't understand that the people of Iran revolted for a reason. We're not in the business of recycling dictators. We want to move forward in the 21st century. We have that right not to want, a hereditary system that, because it doesn't have any backbone itself, it needs to depend on foreign governments to, bring it into power, and then for us to have to owe these countries for decades to come. That's not what we want. That's not the roadmap that the Iranian people want. The reality is that the people of Iran have been paying the price for freedom in Iran with their lives, with their loved one. And they really wanted to be able to see an end to all of this suffering and all of this, everything that they have had to deal with. And the reality is that for once, after 47 years, it seems like that moment has arrived. And they want to be able to seize that moment and to be able to bring about that change and to be able to truly, see that Iran that they all yearn to see, a free and democratic Iran, and somewhere that all its citizens can be respected and be able to live in peace and dignity and, just the basics that we take for granted a lot of times. But we have to understand it's not unfortunately, it's not a given thing. A lot of people are suffering from not having it. And so I think that's where we stand right now. And so that's why you hear like the slogan in this, for instance, in the university. The universities were like the main group that after the bazaar, they joined the uprisings this time around. One of their main slogans, aside from death to the dictator, death to Khamenei, this is your final year. It was down with the oppressor, be it the Shah or the mullahs, or neither crown nor turban, long freedom and democracy. So, and these are the messages that are coming out from the elite of Iran, the cream of the crop of Iran society, the students, And I think it's really important to understand where they're coming from and to understand what their demands are and to respect that and to allow the people of Iran to take their destiny into their own hands.
Yes, you've given me a different perspective, and hopefully too for our audience members of, it's a fight for, I would say, for getting your true home back. I had pictures of South Africa. Obviously, I mentioned the civil rights. I've just thought of so many places where other people have came in and dictated how life should be, but have no idea of living that life or living in the region. And so just to get that to wholly get it back and not to have to share it with anyone that is an outsider. So yes, you gave me like so many pictures and just that feeling of like we just want to have our home our home back. And one of the other things that I thought was remarkable, which is similar to, I guess, some civil rights movements and movements that I've seen just recently in the world, is the rise of women. Women are becoming much more, I guess you would say, bold and taking the lead. And it seems definitely in Iran, women are taking the lead. I guess why, especially in a society where women necessarily weren't, or I guess maybe way back traditionally, but in current times that women are not seen to have the same level of equality. I guess why do you feel that women have risen, or what has motivated women to, I guess, rise up the most in a society that oppresses them?
Well, actually, that's a very good question because there's a history behind it. The reality is this isn't something that brewed overnight, or happened overnight. The fact that women are present, I think that the world started seeing it in 2022, but and it took the world by storm. They were very awed by the bravery of the women of Iran and their, steadfastness. But the reality for us was this was something that had been in the making for 40 years. What is interesting is that the Iranian resistance, and when I'm talk about the Iranian resistance, I mean specifically the MEK, which is one of the bigger organizations who is a member of the NCRI. And they have really been leading this fight throughout these decades. And it was an organization that was formed by 3 students during the short time. And this year, it actually celebrated, and last year in 2025, its 60th anniversary. So over these, over 100,000 people have been killed by this regime for supporting this movement itself. But this organization, when it was back in the beginning of, right in the early 80s, they would do an analysis every year, or a analysis of the movement and the year that had passed. And they started realizing something. This is back in 1984. In 1984, in the annual study of what had happened and where they stood in the analysis, they realized that women in Iran are in this resistance movement. First of all, they have overcome so many obstacles to be able to be active in the resistance, because even in society there is that patriarchal values and whatnot. So they had to break those gender roles and everything to be able to even join the resistance and be active. But on the other hand, they were up against a misogynist regime that had, from day one, concentrated on the suppression of women to be able to then control society. Because if you have control over half of society, then you can control the entire society. That was the mentality, or the thought process for Khomeini. But these people were standing in defiance. These women, from the first day on, they never gave in. They stood up. They stood up step by step against this regime. And in prison, they were the ones who were actually showing the most resistance and resilience, despite being faced with far more brutal methods of torture and suppression and whatnot. So they started seeing that, and then they started saying that that's not just in the prisons of Iran, but it's also through the ranks of this movement, that these women are so much more invested in, bringing change, and to be able to be part of that change, and to be able to, really fight this regime. But then they realized that when you go and look at higher up, they're not presented in leadership as they should be. And that's from progressive movement that was its entire basis is on being against exploitation in all forms, and against any kind of biases and whatnot. For them, that as a very progressive movement, that was something that the minute they realized it, they're like, we have to act against it, because if we have, that means that we still have some of that male dominance viewpoints in our own mindset and whatnot. So from that moment, the resistance actually changed its entire system, and they actually chose a woman to be the co-leader of the movement, and that's Mrs. Bajavi, with now the president-elect of the National Council of Resistance of Iran for the interim government after the fall of the regime. And what she did was, though, she turned this into a whole movement. She didn't stop on herself being chosen because she was very capable. leader, she didn't stop there. She said, this is systematic. All of these women have that potential, and that potential needs to be, extracted and to be used in this fight. So, since actually, this whole process started since 1985, but since 1989, all of the secretary generals that the MEK have been women. And since 1993, the entire leadership council have been women. And that in itself changed, I guess, the culture of resistance in Iran. And it also spread to the National Council of Resistance of Iran. So right now, 52% of the National Council of Resistance of Iran are women. Its president-elect for the interim government is a woman. And it's really, truly the experience that this resistance has had in women's empowerment. I think it's, unprecedented in history. And so Mrs. Rajavi has truly been a trailblazer when it comes to, women's rights and women's empowerment. And I feel like I'm part of a very lucky generation because I grew up having those role models in front of me. I remember I was like 12 when the entire leadership council of the NK became women, and the motto or the slogan that Mrs. Rajavi has always had is "We can and we must." So I grew up with that "We can and we must," and I always thought that there isn't anything that I can't do. And in school growing up, I realized that, hey, I don't have a lot of those glass ceilings that girls around me do. That was because I had seen these women in all walks and all different levels of, taking responsibility. And so I didn't think that there was anything that women couldn't do because I had seen otherwise. And you can just imagine, like, right now, from 1993 till now, that, over 30 years, the people of Iran have been face to face with this issue. Even if because of the censorship, they didn't know about it directly, but indirectly, they have seen it and they have felt it in their society and in their surroundings. And so that has made its impact. And actually, I remember this year in Beijing, the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Women's Conference. And I remember back then, Hillary Clinton was first lady, and she gave a speech that at that time it was supposed to be a major issue, but she said women's rights are human rights, and that was like very progressive back then. And I remember back then, when I heard it, I was like, that's it, because I was seeing more than that in the experience of the resistance. And so 30 years later, this has become part of our culture, and it's like a given that of course women have this power. Of course women are the force for change in Iran. And this has now become a fact instead of just being, a thought. And I think that this experience is one of those experiences that I wish that one day we will be able to share with the world the experience of this resistance, because I think that the world can learn from it and it can make a major impact on the world that we live in today. Because, it's been done. And I think that's what's really important. And the fact that it has proven that it's not just, those who are, a exception to the rule. This is systematically, women have this potential, and they just need to be given the possibility to be able to show it and to take on that responsibility.
Yes, and it's just it's amazing to me when I see that women are leading the movement in a very from a traditionally very patriarchal country, and also the youth. The combination is very revolutionary, pun intended and unintended, but bringing it definitely to the modern age of what we need to be, I guess, experiencing and seeing, and the lifting up of women into roles of leading and changing the thoughts and the direction of a nation. It's truly remarkable, and I agree. I hope that the change is just around the corner, and just to show the strength of women, I think, is just definitely needed just around the world, and to show that women are much more, like without us, I never understand, like, the push down or repression of women. I'm like, well, without us women, there's no planet, everyone. And so I never understand how people cannot see the obvious, and that it's so important to uplift women, because women are the planet. And just like Clinton said, of women's rights are human rights. Yes, directly so. We are the providers of the humans on the actual planet. So you should be nurturing and caring and uplifting and listening to women. And probably if we listen to women more, we wouldn't be fighting as much. And so it's just yeah, that part is just it's outstanding, because I've just been like, as I've watched all these things, I'm just like, wow, these women out here, they are really, they're like warriors. But but I see the women, but they're leading from not I guess you would say, not a part of like being violence, but to really push and keep people together and not leave the movement. Which is true leadership, right? Keeping everyone together and still pushing forward on the goal. So it speaks volumes about women leadership and what we really need in the world today. I guess I only have a couple more questions for you, and then we'll close out our time. And so, I guess in all of this, I guess, what would you say is, I guess if you had a crystal ball, I'm just going to give you kind of what I say, a pageant question. If you had a crystal ball, where do you perceive, with everything that's going on now, if you wanted to say a year from now, what do you think is going to w- unfold from this? Just a crystal ball moment.
Well, telling my dream. Yeah, I think that we will see Iran's freedom flourish, because I think that um and I'm looking at this from a scientific point of view, from a looking at history point of view, because the time that it took for the Shah to be overthrown was 18 months from the beginning to the end of it. The reality is that with this regime, its brutalities, that has taken a long time. But we have seen, from what I've seen in Iran's society as of January of this year, and that will for change that you could see and you could feel. And the reality is that the regime is at its weakest points that it had been in the past 47 years, and especially after the death of Khamenei. And right now, with the regime being in such a weak position that it had to, even though and it was supposed to be a republic, right? So, and it was supposed to replace the monarchy. So after the people of Iran overthrew a monarchy, this regime came into power, but it has had to turn to hereditary lineage again. So right now they have chosen the son of Khamenei to replace him. I think that the regime is in a very, very weak position, but also the people's defiance and their motivation and their resolve to overthrow the regime is at the height that it has been. So I think that we will see that change finally in 2026, in my belief. If, I mean, I am biased to the issue, I guess, because uh, this is as you said, a light lighthearted question, but if you, my brother was telling me a while ago, he was like, yeah, if you look at every single New Year's card that you give, because March 20th is the Persian New Year, so our New Year is different. It's the spring equinox, and like in every card that you've written since you were like 10, or even younger, it said next year will be in a free run. And that day hadn't come yet. I was like, well, it's coming soon. And every year we're getting that much closer to it. But I think that this time around we are getting really close to it because of the price that the people of Iran have paid and continue to pay. And I think that this is, we have entered a new phase and a new era, with, the end to a policy of appeasement that unfortunately the Iranian regime has benefited from for 47 years. But also, as I said, I think that this dedication that we're seeing in the Iranian people, this resolve that we're seeing on the streets among the people of Iran, they really want to be able to take their destiny into their own hands, and I think that they will, and that they will prevail. That the people of Iran will finally prevail, and to be able to put an end to this nightmare that we've been living for so long.
Yes, I hope that happens as well. And then I guess my final question, as things are rapidly moving every day, what role do you think the global community should play in advocating for rights, or how can individuals outside of Iran support activists on the ground? I guess, how can we help?
Well, I think that there's a lot that can be done. First of all, I guess for governments, it would be to actually recognize the Iranian people's fights, and to show support for it. That could be in the form of, recognizing this provisional government that I was just mentioning, or it could be in the form of, right now, as I said, there has been an internet blackout in Iran. That is something that governments can provide and they can help with, to allow the people of Iran to be able to be connected to the world and to be able to, continue their activities and everything. It really does make a difference. Another thing is to hold the regime accountable for its crimes, and because impunity emboldens dictators. And I think that is very important. On the other hand, is important to, as I said, recognize the people's fights and the continuation of it. It is a very difficult situation, but to reiterate that it's the people of Iran who will determine their future. I think that is very key. So sharing that message with activists on the ground, people who want to be able to, do something for the people of Iran and stand by them. First of all, if you're in the US, you could reach out to OIAC. It's OIAC.org. It is the Iranian American Organization of Iranian American Communities. They have chapters in over 40 states across the US, so you're pretty much covered there. And they have a lot of activities, from demonstrations and protests and whatnot to working on Capitol Hill, and echoing the voice of the people of Iran. So if you could help in any way, they would greatly appreciate it, and it would really be helpful to the people of Iran. On the other hand, if you're in other countries, you could reach out to iranfreedom.org, and they actually would be able to put you in contact with local chapters in your country. And I think that, first of all, raise awareness, inform people of, when they speak about this different scenarios on Iran, that there is a third option, and that's supporting the people of Iran in the organized resistance in face of war or appeasement. And there is a way forward, and that's neither giving into the current regime or the previous dictatorship. It's moving forward to a secular democratic republic, and as it is outlined in the 10-point plan by Mrs. Rajari. So read that 10-point plan, share it, raise awareness on it, because I think that could be that one issue that we can all relate to and be able to promote and to be able to echo the force of the Iranian people that way.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Zolal, for your time and insight. To find more about the fight for freedom for Iran, go to ncr-iran.org. If you have a passion for an unserved community, a social justice problem, or want to change minds, contact Project Good Work at projectgood.org to start your project of change today. Subscribe to our mailing list on projectgood.org/subscribe to get our episodes and blog articles sent to you each month. To our listeners, thanks for tuning in to Project Good. We're focused on what matters.